Welcome to Principles of Ecology. Today, we are going to explore a fascinating topic, ecological pyramids and efficiencies. Have you ever wondered why there are millions of blades of grass in a meadow, but only one or two hawks flying overhead? Or why top predators like tigers are so rare in nature? The answers lie in the strict mathematical rules that govern how energy flows through an ecosystem. By the end of this video, you will understand how nature builds its food chains and the fundamental limits placed on life by the laws of physics. Let us dive in. Now that we know what we will be exploring, let us start by visualizing the food chain. Imagine you are building a massive tower out of wooden blocks. There's a strict rule. Every layer you build must be significantly smaller than the layer beneath it. If you start with a wide base, you can only stack a few layers before the tower becomes too narrow. This is exactly how nature builds a food chain, and it is the core intuitive idea behind an ecological pyramid. Instead of wooden blocks, nature stacks living creatures. Plants form the massive base. Herbivores sit in the middle, and carnivores are at the very top. Because a massive amount of resources is lost at each step, the base must be huge to support even a tiny top layer. Building on this tower analogy, scientists use formal graphical representations called ecological pyramids to map out these ecosystems. There are three main types of ecological pyramids used by scientists. The pyramid of numbers shows us exactly how many individual organisms exist at each level. The pyramid of biomass measures the actual physical living matter present. Finally, the pyramid of energy tracks how much raw energy is flowing through the system. Understanding these pyramids is absolutely crucial because they give us a quick visual health check of an entire ecosystem. Conservationists use them to predict what will happen if a specific layer is damaged, such as a massive die-off of plants, and they reveal the fragile balance of nature. Now that we understand the structure of these pyramids, let us look at the fundamental mathematical rule that governs the pyramid of energy. This is often called the 10% rule. Conceptually, this formula tells us that whenever an animal eats something, it only stores about 10% of that food's energy in its own body to pass on to the next predator. In this equation, En represents the energy available at the current higher trophic level, usually measured in joules. En-1 represents the energy available at the previous, lower trophic level. The 0.10 represents the average ecological efficiency. If the energy at the lower level increases, the energy at the higher level will also increase proportionally, but it will always remain a very small fraction of the original amount. Before we move on, let us see this formula in action with a concrete example. Imagine a vibrant grassland ecosystem where the producers, mostly tall grasses, generate exactly 10,000 joules of energy through photosynthesis. We want to find out how much energy reaches the snakes at the top of the food chain. We must apply the 10% rule step by step. First, the grasshoppers eat the grass. We multiply the 10,000 joules from the grass by the efficiency factor of 0.10. This shows that the grasshoppers only retain 1,000 joules of energy in their bodies. The other 9,000 joules are completely lost to the environment as heat or undigested matter. This step-by-step loss is exactly why the pyramid tapers so sharply. Continuing with our grassland food chain, we now move up to the secondary consumers. The frogs eat the grasshoppers, but they only manage to extract 10% of the grasshopper's stored energy. Multiplying the available 1,000 joules by 0.10 leaves the frogs with just 100 joules. Finally, we calculate the energy available to the tertiary consumers, the snakes. The snakes hunt the frogs, taking in only 10% of their energy. Multiplying the frog's 100 joules by 0.10 gives us a final value of 10 joules. Physically, this means that out of a massive pool of 10,000 joules of grass energy, a mere 10 joules actually makes it to the top predator, explaining why they require massive hunting territories to survive. Now that we have calculated the energy loss step by step, let us look at how this is visually represented. You are looking at an ecological pyramid of energy. Notice how the base is the widest, representing the 10,000 joules from the producers, the grass. As we move up to the grasshoppers, frogs, and finally the snakes at the top, each tier shrinks dramatically. The upward arrows show the 10% energy transfer to the next level, while the wavy arrows pointing outward from every single tier represent the 90% of energy lost as heat and waste. This diagram beautifully illustrates that the pyramid of energy is always upright, strictly governed by the laws of thermodynamics, limiting food chains to just 4 or 5 levels. This massive loss of energy we just visualized brings us to the concept of ecological efficiencies. Think of a car engine running on gasoline. Not all the fuel moves the car forward. A huge amount is lost as heat. Animals work in the exact same way, acting like very leaky biological engines. When a caterpillar eats a leaf, it poops out a large portion, burns another portion just to crawl around, and only uses a tiny fraction to grow. Ecological efficiency is the scientific way we measure exactly how much of that fuel is successfully converted into useful body mass versus how much is wasted. We break this down into consumption, assimilation, and production efficiencies to track the exact fate of consumed energy in an ecosystem. To understand exactly where the energy goes, let us look at the formulas used to calculate how an organism processes its food, starting with assimilation efficiency. Conceptually, this formula tells us what percentage of the food eaten actually makes it into the bloodstream instead of passing straight through as waste. In this equation, AE stands for assimilation efficiency, expressed as a percentage. The variable A represents the energy assimilated, meaning the energy successfully absorbed into the body. The variable I represents the total energy ingested, or the total amount of food eaten. We multiply by 100 to convert the decimal into a percentage. Physically, if the ingested energy increases while assimilation stays the same, the efficiency drops, meaning the food is very hard to digest, like tough woody plants. Now that we have our first efficiency formula, let us apply it to a specific example involving a single insect. A caterpillar ingests exactly 1,000 joules of leaf material in a day. Because the plant is fibrous, it excretes 500 joules as solid feces. We need to find its assimilation efficiency. First, we identify the ingested energy, I, as 1,000 joules. Next, we calculate the assimilated energy, A, by subtracting the 500 joules of waste from the ingested energy, leaving us with 500 joules successfully absorbed. Finally, we divide the assimilated energy by the ingested energy and multiply by 100. The final answer is 50%. Physically, this means the caterpillar extracts exactly half of the raw energy from the leaves it eats. Now that we know how much energy the caterpillar absorbed, we need to know how it is used, which brings us to production efficiency. This formula tells us how much of the absorbed energy is actually used for growth and reproduction, versus how much is burned for daily survival through respiration. Here, PE stands for production efficiency, also a percentage. The variable P represents the net production, which is the energy actually used to build new body tissue. The variable A is the assimilated energy we just defined. We again multiply by 100 for the percentage. Physically, if an animal spends a lot of energy running around or keeping warm, its production energy P will be very low, causing the overall production efficiency to decrease significantly. This is why warm-blooded animals have lower production efficiencies than cold-blooded ones. Building on our previous calculation and this new formula, we now need to find the caterpillar's production efficiency. We know the assimilated energy, A, is 500 joules. The caterpillar uses 300 joules for cellular respiration, which includes moving and breathing. To find the production energy, P, we subtract the 300 joules burned for respiration from the 500 joules of assimilated energy. This leaves exactly 200 joules for actual growth. Now, we divide the production energy of 200 joules by the assimilated energy of 500 joules and multiply by 100. The final answer is 40%. Physically, this tells us that out of the energy absorbed into its bloodstream, the caterpillar used 40% to grow bigger, which is a relatively high efficiency, typical for cold-blooded insects. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us review the most important ideas. First, ecological pyramids are essential visual tools that map out the structure of an ecosystem, showing us why a massive producer base is absolutely necessary to support all other life. Second, the 10% rule is the strict mathematical law, dictating that roughly 90% of energy is lost as heat and waste at each trophic step. Finally, by breaking down ecological efficiencies into assimilation and production, we can pinpoint exactly where this energy is lost. These metrics explain the physical limitations of food webs and why energy transfer is inherently inefficient. You now have a solid understanding of the mathematical rules of survival in nature. Great job!